Right.
Hello, good afternoon. I would like to welcome you to today's panel, Transforming Conservation with National Geographic and Woodland Park Zoo. There's been a lot of discussion about how VR can enhance empathy. By placing yourself in the shoes of someone else, you're able to experience the world firsthand from their perspective and better understand and appreciate their situation and stories. Today, we're building on that theme and sharing how VR is aiding conservation of endangered animals and habitats, and helping conservation organizations evolve how they tell their stories, raise awareness, and drive people to action. And from a developer's perspective, we're looking forward to hearing more about what it takes to develop immersive experiences that can also inspire action. My name is Cindy Ball. I lead the Oculus education programs for Facebook. So with us today on our panel, we have Wesley Della Vola. He is a director of live events and experiences at National Geographic. He leads an exciting new program hosted in the world's largest permanent virtual reality theater, a program which recently won the Webby Award for Best VR Interaction Design for its innovative approach to storytelling. Next, we have Dr. Laurie Stewart. Laurie is the Director of Impact for the Woodland Park Zoo in Seattle. She oversees research on emerging educational practices and the zoo's community-driven learning partnerships that support a culture of conservation. And finally, Martin De Ronda is a creative director for Force Field Entertainment. He's worked with global content providers, such as the Anne Frank House and National Geographic, to create informative VR content that has the potential to engage and empower customers to take positive action. Most recently, Martin has worked on National Geographic's Explore VR title, an expedition to Antarctica. Welcome to all of our panelists. Before we move into the discussion portion of this session, I'd like to give an opportunity to each of our panelists to introduce their work. Go ahead.
So I'm going to jump right past this. You know who I am now. I want to introduce you to the Grosvenor Auditorium. So this is our auditorium, 400 people here in Washington, D.C., in our iconic and historic headquarters. Fun fact is National Geographic, before we had a magazine, we had talks. A month after our founding, we gave our first talk by one of our founders. So we have a long tradition of giving talks, bringing explorers from around the world to our headquarters in D.C. But what recently happened, actually about a year ago on October 10th, was our first ever virtual reality exploration, a whole new way of storytelling, which brings together immersive content, traditional media, and a speaker live on stage for an audience to have a shared virtual reality experience, experiencing something together. And the whole goal is to excite and engage people, to get them to care about what they're watching and be engaged to take action or support initiative and become good stewards. And of course, we want to connect with people. We are working to have student matinees, events for kids that will actually teach them about certain places and things that we're working on. But all of that does, of course, come to what is the purpose of doing all of this. So immersive content, VR, AR, XR, MR, all the various forms of immersive, they're fun and exciting, but are we doing it to better anything? And that's what we want to find out. So we have a research project to actually look at that, which I'll talk about in a little bit, but we understand the why we're doing it. And really, it's just fun to watch people experience virtual reality together, especially in a shared experience. Oh, and sorry, I went a little further ahead. But it really is a way to explore like it's never happened before. So we continue that tradition of 130 years of storytelling live and in person in a new way. And it's been really exciting to watch 3,500 people in the past year come through and experience this experience at National Geographic.
Thank you. Laurie.
Cool. That is really, really cool. So my name is Laurie Stewart, and I have been working at the Woodland Park Zoo now for a very exciting 3 months. As the director,
welcome.
Thank you, and I'm also inviting empathy right now with that statement. As the Director of Impact, my team is responsible for studying emerging practices in conservation education, studying those, the impact of those, how they can be applied into educational practices. And then another thing that we really focus on is how do we measure how effectively we are meeting the zoo's mission. Next slide. And so I was going to say, as I tell this story, knowing that I've been there for 3 months and I'm taking up this work where it is currently, I will be telling the story sort of in a mix of first and third person and leaning on Cindy, who was there at the very beginning, the birth of the project. So just to give a little background, in 2018, so last year, the Woodland Park Zoo opened a new exhibit called the Awesome Rhino Reserve, and it features 2 young male rhinos whose names are Taz and Glenn. And at the same time, we partnered with Oculus to create a 360 virtual experience because we were really interested in how does immersive technology help us to better meet the Woodland Park Zoo's mission of saving species, such as rhinos, by inspiring people to make conservation a priority in their lives. And we're particularly interested in the way that immersive technology can either foster or increase empathy. What role does our empathy framework play with that experience in order to improve conservation? So I'm really excited to be here today to represent the results of the pilot study that we did on that.
Thank you, Lori. And Martin.
Hi, I'm Martin de Ronde, well pronounced, by the way. Yeah, so as our company name implies, we are an entertainment company, Force Field Entertainment. We come from a traditional game development background, and when we started moving into VR, we've been producing a number of different games experiences on Oculus platforms, but we've also been broadening our focus and tackling serious experiences, educational content. And I think almost 2 years ago, we were presented with this amazing opportunity to collaborate with National Geographic and Oculus to create a travel experience, which is National Geographic Explore VR. And the experience effectively allows people to travel the world and go to iconic locations, learn more about them, experience them. And the first episode, because there's going to be more installments and more locations over time, the first one launched in May of this year alongside the launch of Oculus Quest, National Geographic Explore VR Antarctica. And as the title implies, you're on a journey through Antarctica as you try to recover the location of a lost penguin colony. And the experience actually takes you across a number of different areas in Antarctica, and you engage as a player in a number of different activities: kayaking, ice climbing, finding shelter from a polar storm, and eventually uncovering the location of the penguin colony. And I can talk all about it, but I think to give you a better impression of what National Geographic Explore VR is all about, I think we should run the official trailer.
Great, thank you. Thank you, Martin. Thank you all for those introductions. I wanted to start with Lori. The Woodland Park Zoo is both a champion of conservation of habitats and animals around the world, many different projects underway. They also base all of their work in empathy. And it's one of the few places that I've interacted with which has a strong documented philosophy of empathy, defining what is it, how do you move people through it, And Lori, I would love if you could share some of that with us.
Sure, absolutely. I am a little curious if I could ask how many people in the room are educators? Yeah, well,
Let's hear it.
absolutely. Why not, right? Give yourself a round of applause. I just wanted to make a comment that I never thought that I would be in such a position to talk about empathy as an educator to educators where I can't see your faces. So, the Woodland Park Zoo for the past few years has been working with a number of other zoos and aquariums who are accredited, and that accreditation means that we, every 5 years, have to go through a process to show that we have the highest standards for animal welfare. So that is no longer a barrier to the conversations that we have with one another. So working with those zoos and aquariums on this emerging theory of the impact that empathy has on conservation education. The theory that we have is that the more empathy that you can build between people or between people and animals, the better we're going to take care of one another. So the more empathy we have for animals, the more we are motivated to have pro-conservation behaviors for the benefit of those animals. And our working definition of empathy is that it is a stimulated emotional response that relies on your ability to perceive, understand, and care for the other, whether that other is a person or whether it's an animal. So cognitive empathy means that we, on an academic level or a cognitive level are able to understand what the other person or the animal needs in order to thrive. And we may or may not have a particular emotional, we may not be feeling the emotion that they feel. Whereas affective empathy, which a lot of people are familiar with, is when you have sort of a visceral sense of what that emotion is. So you feel sad while the animal is sad, or you perceive them to be sad, or you're sad because the person you're with is sad. We're looking at what we're calling compassionate empathy, which is really figuring out how do cognitive and affective empathy work together to have an empathy that people are feeling towards animals. They're understanding what animals really need to thrive. That we see a lot of people placing on animals a sense of, well, that animal looks sad, so they must need to be cuddled. That animal looks lonely, so they must need to be saved. But if we can move people to really understanding that animals have agency over their own behaviors, then they hopefully will understand as individuals and as a species or as a community of animals what those animals truly need to be, to have welfare as defined by who or what that animal is. So that's the framework of empathy that we're using as we launch these different technologies or different practices.
Great, thank you. I guess going back, staying with you for a moment, on the 360 film that we worked on with the zoo, can you go back and frame sort of why you did it, how you thought about the design? And again, I know you weren't there at the beginning, but I know you're very familiar with the project. Whatever you can share about how you got started, and we're hoping to accomplish with that project.
Sure. So I think it probably feels obvious that getting people into a virtual platform lends itself to feeling more closely connected to the content that you are experiencing, right? And so we were very curious, so when people are with the rhinos in their exhibit and they can smell them and see them and watch them behave, how is there any difference between that and seeing the rhinos in that virtual experience? Can we create a closer connection? Do we see higher levels of empathetic response to the animals when they're in a focused platform like that? So that was one of the goals in the empathy framework. And then of course, the zoo this is really new for them to also be in the technology world, figuring out how to apply new technologies to these really big conservation questions that we have. So we also had a lot of questions about how does it function? How is it different? What does this mean to be a zoo where you have both real experiences and then virtual experiences at the same time?
Do you want to just say a few words about what the actual experience was that people had experienced in the headset?
Sure. And I actually brought one with me, so if you come to the speakers platform afterwards, you can watch it yourself. It is called Breakfast with Rhinos because you start off in what we call the commissary, where the animal keepers are preparing the food for the rhinos, and then you go and meet the rhinos, and you meet them as individuals, because one of the best practices of empathetic education is to have people understand that animals are individuals with unique personalities and unique needs. So you meet Taz and you meet Glenn and you learn a little bit about how they're different from one another and how they interact with their keepers in different ways. And you sort of follow them through getting into a mud hole, taking a shower, which is a really popular part of the video. Who knew rhinos love showers? Apparently they have to be talked out of them at the end of the day. And they love their mud holes too. And so the experience is really sort of like a day in the life of a keeper or a day in the life of the rhino. So you could kind of take you could be in either shoe, I think. We found that people responded as much to the keepers in the video as they do to the actual rhinos, which was one of our biggest takeaways from that. We didn't quite expect that the keepers would play such a big emotional role in the video as they do.
Great, thank you. I hope you all have a chance to see it. It's really a nice film. Well, I think we'll come back to some of the results and some things you've learned from that in a little bit. But Martin, do you have any kind of thoughts on how you think about empathy as you're developing your projects?
Yeah, well, for us, it's obviously different every time. We've been working on a wide variety of different experiences, even in the educational space, you could say. But I think for us, because we work not with 360 videos, but with CG, computer-generated imagery and real-time visuals, the first thing that we need to do really is to ground people in the world. I don't think you can establish empathy with animals or characters in the world if you do not believe in the world you're in. And I think it's been almost like a common thread in all our projects. With Anne Frank House VR experience, for instance, the original vision was for people to be able to wander through the Anne Frank House and hear quotes from her diary. And I really wanted to make sure that people connected with the world because there was no characters in there. So every single room you go to, you can actually connect with objects that are in the individual rooms, and it grounds you in the world, and it allows you to establish a sense of empathy for the world and then for its characters. And then with National Geographic Explore VR, same thing. The moment you go into the experience, we could have chosen to put you on almost like a ride where you are being presented with all the animals in the Antarctica world, and we'll take you on a journey. But instead, we chose to actually have you grab the oars and have you kayak and have you climb to establish again that sense of being there so that you care for the world, and then you can start working on the empathy side of things and make sure that you care about the animals and humans present in that experience.
Great, thank you. So moving to Wesley, the National Geographic has hosted live speaker series for a very long time.
131 years.
131 years, so it's a well-worn machine. I don't know if any of you have had a chance to attend, but just these beautiful presentations that the National Geographic explorers give about different parts of the world. The presentations generally are videos and beautiful photography and just masterful storytelling up on stage.
Yeah, and you kind of hit on it perfectly. I think with Explore VR is what Geographic has done really well is take you into something and take you into an experience with new technology. We have engineers that design camera traps down in our basement. It's kind of amazing. It's like a skunk works for camera photography and camera work. But that being there in the middle of something is thanks to our explorers. So we have a network around the globe of explorers who are telling stories, doing science, doing research, educators. There's 14,000 grants in our 131-year history. So it's a lot of people doing great work, and they have amazing ideas and come to us with, I've got this thing. It's amazing. I've almost figured it out. How can we make it better? And that's kind of how the theater came to be. One of our explorers had been traveling around the world, had some great immersive content, and wanted to create a live experience, had worked with a group called Spaces VR to start formulating this idea, and wanted to bring it to our stage because he had been on our stage and been successful and great presenter with images and media, but how do we take it to the next step? And he brought it in. We had a great pilot with Samsung Gear VR, which PTSD still from that. Like earlier, I was actually thinking about it, 450 phones, and yeah. So thankfully, the technology got really fantastic, and we kept working at it and figuring out a way to take this concept and make it something that could be replicable with technology that was easy to use for the experience. We wanted the guests to come in and not have to think about anything, make it fun and exciting for them, put on a headset and jump into an experience. And throughout the past year, we've refined it. We've had 8 shows, 3,500 people come through, and each time it gets a little better, we try something different. But it really was a collaborative effort between our explorers, our partner Spaces VR, Black Dot Films, and really just being tenacious to keep the project driving and pull in more stakeholders. I was a bit of a dog with a bone, in that there's this great thing, and I wanted to tell everyone about it within Geographic and get them to experience it. So it was grabbing them, sticking them in a headset, making them come to the first show, come to the next show, test 10 headsets. Hey, you want to come see? We've got 10 headsets that are working. Come experience this thing. And it just slowly, word of mouth spread, which it does now. We have 3 shows this fall, and they're sold out already. So
congratulations.
it's been a lot of, the idea kind of came from working with our explorers and how do we create something really magical together, really fantastic and unexpected.
So I think the magic, well, a lot of the magic was all the hard work that you did to make it actually, you know, go live. But from a storytelling perspective, right, there's, maybe you could talk about the structure of the new presentations and kind of how that impacts storytelling.
So if I told you were going to a live experience that was 60 minutes and it was a virtual reality exploration, that may seem daunting, 60 minutes of being in a headset. But actually what we've done is we've worked to create a whole new experience where it's a 60-minute long story. And you have the person on stage who sets up the story, tells you things, shows you pictures, shows you video, and then they take you in. And they pull you back out, and you go back in and out for about 20 minutes worth of VR broken up in 3 to 5 segments. So a really great example is one of our explorers is an underwater ecologist, and you go diving with her. So your headset becomes your scuba mask. And so she shows you how to sign that you've seen a turtle, or if you're doing okay, and keeps you breathing as you go in and you swim with manta rays. So it's this way of really combining a person live who is there and connects with you. So you talk about empathy. This person was there. They were face-to-face with that manta ray that you're now face-to-snout with as well. So it's this great experience that brings all of the facets of storytelling together and something completely unique that is really exciting to see and experience, both as the presenter and the audience member.
So I'm curious, what response have you gotten from your adult audiences at these adult sessions?
You saw a little bit of it earlier. There were some agape mouths and some smiles and a little bit of wonder and shock, a lot of oohs and ahs, especially when you turn to your right and there's a lion right here that does elicit some response. But overall, it's been overwhelmingly positive in that most of the audience feels that the VR added with their understanding and of the concept that they were engaged with. All would like to come back and see more. And the great thing, and I really have to hone in on this, is it's open to everyone. Our age spread is pretty even from 16 to 80. So you've got one of our regulars, Sally Morales, who's 70, who signed up, got the first VR show, but she came with her great-grandson, who's 15. And they both enjoyed it because they walk in, it works, they don't have to use a remote. We trigger everything remote, and they all synchronize, and it's an easy experience, and they have a lot of fun with it. So we make it very easy and accessible, and that's a huge part of the theater, and I think the whole experience is we make this accessible. And I know that for the Woodland Park Zoo, it seems like that's a big part of it too, is how do you make getting close to the animals and understanding them accessible to as many people, and that's what we want to do. We want to make this accessible, easy, fun. It's kind of your gateway immersive experience. Like it's your gateway VR. Like you can just put the headset on and it works. And you don't have to worry about the functionality or anything like that.
And I'd say you also have like, Wesley has done a wonderful job is when you walk into the theater, each seat has an Oculus Go hanging on it. So you right away you know what you're up for. And throughout the beginning, as people are sitting down, he has very explicit instructions up on the screen
Don't
about
touch any of the
what
buttons.
not to touch. So he really does make it easy for someone who doesn't know what they're doing, has never tried VR before, to come in. And I think when I was on one of the early shows, he's having everybody put it on and try and see if there's any problems before the show starts. And I think like one hand raised if someone was having a problem. I mean, he really has this down to a science.
Think of me as like a mix between a Southwest flight attendant and your IT department. So I'm friendly and welcoming, but you're going to do what I tell you. And I'm going to tell you, did you push the button multiple times? And chances are you probably did.
Yeah.
You know, I told you about 5 times to touch the button.
Great, thank you. Lori, did you have a comment?
I did. I just wanted to say how much I love the story of the woman who came with her great-grandson, because to me that story demonstrates against one of the concerns that I think a lot of sites have, which is that to put on a headset means that you're having a very individualized experience, and you're no longer having a social experience. And so there's concern that through these headsets or virtual reality experiences, people will no longer be learning with each other or from each other. But I think that demonstrates that it's not true in 2 ways, that they were learning about technology together, and then they probably went home and talked about the entire experience together.
And on the way out, the chatter it's so loud. It's different than any other event. We'll have 60-minute talks with world-renowned photographers and scientists. The energy when people leave a VR show and they're talking, did you see that? Did you look that way? The lion, oh my God, and then that manta, and then, it's that reaction, and people are just so engaged, and they're having fun together. It's a shared experience, and that's really the beauty of it.
Right. Is there some, did they also bonded over having survived the lion encounter?
I mean, it was kind of the surviving the lion encounter. That was a big one. And then, of course, the leopard seal. People are very, thrown off when you've got a leopard seal, literally in your face trying to feed you a half-dead penguin.
Yeah.
You kind of bond after that. So.
Great, thank you. I wanted to come back maybe, actually, you have the adult theater that you've been describing. You have also started a research project looking at how VR impacts learning for student matinees.
Yep.
And I know you're about halfway through that research, so I don't know what you want to share or not today, but you can maybe just say what the research is on a general level.
Yeah, the research on a general level is we're actually doing some A/B testing. So we'll have a presenter give a talk with traditional media. They'll give the same exact talk with the VR component. So the students will have headsets, the audio will play over the theater. We're going to do that twice. We have our second one coming up in October that will focus on the Okavango Delta and Botswana. So we'll do the same thing, and we'll go and we'll look at what the students' reactions are, how they retain knowledge, their comprehension, their understanding, their engagement. So we don't have that full research. We're still working on it. But anecdotally, that excitement that I was touching on earlier is there with the students. They are excited, both of them. Don't get me wrong, the students love them. But the first one, they'll ask questions about the speaker, where they went to school, how they decide they want to do this. And then in the second one, that first reaction was, so what does the manta ray eat? Where does the turtle live? And it was just anecdotally interesting to see the energy and focus shift. And I think when we talk about empathy, they were caring about the animal and the ecosystem they were in, at least by the questions they were asking. And so, of course, there's full research going with that, but that was just me being the producer in the wing watching, going, oh, the questions are just different.
Yeah, that's great. Well, Lori, to come back to the research of the Woodland Park Zoo, you described a bit of how the audience was broken into multiple groups. Can you share some of the findings and how VR impacted the visitor experience and how you think it impacted empathy for the animals?
So I'm not sure I did describe that we broke we had 139 participants that we studied last fall, and we broke them into 3 treatments. So one group only visited the rhinos in their exhibit, and then we did pre and post surveys with them. We did pre and post surveys with people who only did the 360 experience. And then we did pre and post with people who first did the 360 experience and then went to see the rhinos in their exhibit. I think the biggest surprise was that where we would have anticipated that those who did both the 360 experience and the rhino visit would have the highest levels of everything we were measuring for, it was actually the folks who did only the 360 experience who measured the highest on things like excitement and enjoyment. On pro-conservation behavior afterward, they were much more likely to leave with an intention to take actions that would specifically help the rhinos. And then we also had some measures for how connected people were feeling to the rhinos, how much they recognized them as individuals, how much they noticed how the animals were being taken care of, what their relationships to the keepers were. People on the VR only measured much, much higher. And so I do think, of course, in research it's important to throw some caveats out, which is that we learned we probably needed some more treatments than just those 3. We didn't look at people who went to the rhino exhibit and then did the 360. And I think maybe some of our questions were so focused on what we wanted the impact of or what we hoped the impact of the virtual experience would be, that we may not have opened the questions up enough to what it would look like if they were to have done both. But it did absolutely do enough to say that something is significantly happening in that virtual experience related to empathy. People are getting very close experiences with the animal, or they're feeling that they have very, not just that they're, literally you turn around and there's also a rhino in your face at one point, or you turn around and you think you're gonna fall into the exhibit. So even though you're lacking some of the hard sensory experiences, you're having some of those softer sensory experiences, but that the way we drove the narrative and or other aspects of being able to take a 360 view from within the exhibit really was hitting the measures that we have for empathy.
That's great. Yeah, I'm curious to see what, before we maybe go into the future, I think there's, both of you have a huge amount of logistics, like process to think about how do you actually deploy these devices in your organizations. And I think you have different challenges also. So I would be curious just to, again, to hear a bit about how you're managing these devices.
Who wants to tell their sob story first?
I'm just jealous. I'm so jealous that you have a theater. Just throw that out there.
You're not jealous of the door that's like 5'5" that has to fit a cage through that fits within millimeters, that has 72 headsets in it, charging cords, and a lock so you can move it but keep it secure and charged.
Wow.
So we actually measured it within millimeter to make sure it could fit through this backstage door, because it's a theater and that's what we have to work with. But those 450 headsets have to be charged, they have to be stored, they have to be secured, and it has to be mobile so we can deploy them on site. So you may be jealous of the theater. It's a beautiful theater, do not get me wrong, but it poses some unique challenges.
I think one thing that you did well, that I've also really appreciated some of the experiences we had yesterday in the educational summit, because we were doing a pilot study with 10 to 15 headsets, and we're really interested in individual responses to the video that we created. Like, we were just really looking for those empathy measurements a little bit more than we had really broadened to how do we now apply all of this on a larger scale. But we've really learned the hard way that when you don't have a centralized way to turn all of the videos on or off at the same time, that you are needing a lot more staff out there to respond to either the visitors, or if you take it into the classroom like we did last week, so sort of on a one-to-one basis, say, is the video playing? Where are you? Well, what does it look like? Well, do you see a button on the left side? Yeah, while you're holding the handset correctly, all you need to do is push play, and then I'll take the handset away from you.
But where's the play?
Yeah, so
that's the big question.
Yeah, so being able to control it, it would help a lot.
And that's actually a huge thing. A big part of what makes the theater successful is that we do have a remote activation system that we worked with our partner Spaces VR to create, and that you walk in, you don't need the remotes. They're actually locked in the cage. Part of my spiel when I'm your Southwest flight attendant is that the warning sign about the controller is don't worry about it. It's in a cage in the back without a battery in it with its 449 other friends. But you walk in and it's so easy to control. It's remote activated. You're in the app and you don't have to worry about that. And everyone sees everything at the same time. We're experimenting with other ways to do that. We would like to potentially also expand who gets to have access to this system and who can have these experiences. But that was the biggest hurdle, was doing that. And then doing it with 450 headsets. Anyone who knows network architecture knows there's like a 256 unit count that kind of weirds things out. Nothing like being 5 minutes from your first show, the director of your museum, who is your boss's 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 boss, is about to start the show and you lose a third of your headsets from your network controller. And you have no idea why. But thankfully you have a network engineer who can quickly figure out what's going on, and you have a boss that runs with any punch that thrown at her, and the show is successful and no one knows. But that's a testament to a really amazing team that is really fantastic. And works to figure out everything from the subtle nuance of loading content on 450 headsets at once to having visitors experiences team that is there to quickly switch out a headset. If it doesn't work, you raise your hand, we bring you a new one, and we make it really easy to engage with. But it's a big team effort.
That's cool.
Thank you.
I will also just throw out the one more thing, because I do think it's interesting for people who are developing these in the zoo, aquarium, museum world, or informal science site. One of the reasons I'm so jealous of the building or the theater that you have is I do come from the aquarium world. And something that I'm learning a lot about in building exhibits at the zoo is that we're outside, right? And so who would have thought rain would be something I need to think about now, or sun exposure. Whereas when you're in an aquarium or a museum, it becomes more about where within the building do you create this experience. So at Woodland Park Zoo, I know there's folks here I hope that we partner with in future. That is something that we need to figure out.
Yeah.
Good point. So Martin, I wanted to talk to you because to hear from you about how you're also thinking about empathy as you're developing your games and your experiences, and sort of the difference of the way you think about building your experiences, whether it's a game or an experience that's built more for empathy and action.
Yeah, I don't think we really take a different approach in developing our experiences, but we do really take a different approach in defining who we're developing it for. So whenever we start a project, if it is indeed an educational project, it's really important for us to define who it is for, and that really drives everything we do in terms of the mechanics. So with educational content, we need to make sure that the actual game mechanics or experience mechanics take a backseat. As game developers, we sometimes like to cut corners and just take the easy route, because everything needs to be sacrificed for the sake of it being a fun experience. Whereas if it's about educational content, it's about, for instance, the National Geographic, it needs to be authentic, it needs to be credible. And the moment you start to dilute that and make sure that that whole message that you're sending out in terms of educational content is no longer credible, then off goes your educational mission. So when we were collaborating with National Geographic, we found out that authenticity, and obviously that sounds a little bit naive, but authenticity was super important, and being respectful, super important, and we couldn't cut corners anymore, and we really had to think about our audience in that way, and not rely on the corner cutting that we would normally do in game.
Yeah. I was going to ask you, what was the most surprising thing as you started taking on these National Geographic projects?
Well, I think, just as I just explained, the whole authenticity aspect, just to give an example, we were playing around with a lot of different VR prototypes for exploring a site, which is going to be actually the next installment, which I can't talk about just now, but exploring a certain site in a continent south of here. And we'd come up with these really cool VR mechanics with metal detectors and everything, and we'd come up with this idea for a mini game mechanic almost where you'd find a shard of a vase, and the vase was actually defined by Nat Geo experts, and we said, well, wouldn't it be great if you find this shard of a vase, and then you try and find all the other pieces, and then you can piece it together in VR, and then you get more information about the vase, which would be fantastic. And then the Nat Geo expert said, that's not how archaeology works. Nope. It's all about just, you have a square meter, you find a shard of a vase, and there's this urge to find all the other pieces, but you just document what you find, and then you move on to the next square meter. And we're like, okay, that doesn't seem to work as a game or as an experience or a fun and entertaining experience, so we had to work around that. So that's some of the surprises you come across if you move in between game development and serious content or educational content.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that context is a big part of what happens with the theater too. You have the person that was there who can relay, this is actually how you create this, how you would find that piece of archaeological site. So like we had Aaron Huey, who was our first presenter. He went to Bears Ears and had created a photogrammatic object with photogrammetry of sacred spaces, and it had to be accurate. And these were rendered and created and worked with local communities to make sure that we got it accurate. And we were telling the story correctly. Even one of the collaborators, Devlin Gandy, he's Native American himself, so for him to be involved is really important because it is about that context and working with communities and knowing what's going on. So I'm glad that you got that experience.
Yeah, and for us, it also works the other way. Coming from a game development background, we're obviously always laser focused on engaging the end user, making sure we engage them in a fun and entertaining way. And I'm not sure if I can say this in this audience, but educational content obviously has the inherent risk somewhere sometimes to be perceived as being boring, right? Yeah. So as a game developer, we were able to leverage our entertainment experience and package the interesting, serious content in a fun and entertaining way. And that's when you see it stick in a much more compelling way. And to give another example of that, one of the activities that you can undertake in the Antarctica experience is photography. So you can take pictures of all the different animals that you see in the experience. And what we could have done is actually, we could have gone for a guided tour and just deliver all the educational messages or serious content one after the other, like in an audio tour at a museum or on the site. But instead, we chose to give people the option in an entertaining and engaging way. So whenever you take a picture now in National Geographic Explore VR, we actually see what's in the actual photo frame. And the moment it's something of interest, we actually have your fictional Net Geo editor come into your earpiece and say, hey, that's great. So you're in your kayak and suddenly you see a whale emerge from the water. You take a picture and it says, oh, that's great. That's a minke whale, blah, blah, blah about the minke whales. And suddenly you could see users go like, oh, wow, this is a great picture. And then they would show other people and say, do you see this? This is a minke whale and it does blah, blah, blah. So you actually connect this moment of being proud about something you've done in VR in a fun way, and then connect it to the educational content. And we could see it stick. People who actually engaged in the mini-game mechanic in Explore VR knew a lot more about Antarctica than people who didn't do that. So that was a very interesting find.
And that really builds empathy too when you're the photographer and you've connected with that animal in a direct way. Yeah. I think something that's important to both of you in particular is expanding your audience and reaching people maybe who are outside of your physical space. Yeah. And so I'm curious how you might think about VR, bringing those animal experiences out of the zoo, out of your auditorium. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. I know that this pilot project is sort of lending to the stereotype of a zoo being very place-based, where people come and they see the animals who live there in their habitats. But zoos are really evolving and are realizing the role that we have in conservation in the world. And not only do we have researchers on site who are out in the world working on conservation projects with communities who are relating to the animals that we're working with. So of course we should have some more Nat Geo connections, right? But we realize that we are also community catalysts. Yeah. We are really looking at how are we part of a social movement towards conservation. We happen to have animals who live at the zoo with us, but how do those animals help us drive those connections to the way that people live with animals out in the wild? Or frankly, some of the conversations we were having earlier today, how can things like a VR experience or an immersive experience help us to connect to animals that people may never see, but are still important? That if you are interested in conservation, if you're interested in preserving habitats or living sustainably with entire ecosystems, right, do you need to see a wolverine in order to care about it? Or can you come to understand what a wolverine is and what it needs through a virtual experience and then take action that will help preserve the habitats of those wolverines?
Yeah, and we definitely want to do that too. And a good possible opportunity with that would be our photo art campaign, where we could create a virtual sanctuary where you could show animals to anyone and anywhere in any zoo through virtual reality. And a big part of it too is we want to take a system where you can activate headsets, multiple, to communities actually around conservation sites. Oftentimes, the community that you go to and you work in these areas are overlooked, and we want to make sure that they're part of it too. So could you imagine taking something back to the community where you were working so they can see and experience it as well, not just here in the US or school systems, but broadly, thinking more globally and being integrated into your community, a big community focus is something that Geographic does, and making sure that anywhere we work, we're engaged in the community and working with them and sharing resources. So we get from them, we give back. And this is a great way to potentially do that, to take these experiences and show and experience them with the communities we work in.
Thank you. We're down to the last few seconds. Does anybody have a final thought they want to throw out to make sure our audience has something to take away with them?
And I just want to echo your comments about people leaving the theater energetic and lots of chatter. I think, you know, when we see the responses to our games and then our educational content with games, if you compare it to traditional games and then VR games, people go like, oh, it's so much more immersive and so much better, and it really elevates it. And then if you have traditional educational content and then in VR, it's just off the scale if done well. And I think we really underestimate the power of VR as a tool to educate people. It's just amazing, and that's why we will keep on doing it next to our games business.
And to build off that, it's accessibility. You make it accessible, you make it fun. People want to learn. It's stealth education. They have no idea, but oh, I'm learning something and having fun, and anyone can engage with it.
Okay, we are out of time. Thank you to our panelists.
Thank you.
Our panelists will be going to the speaker pavilion right now, and so feel free to come by and continue the conversation. Thank you.